Today, we're going to rank every single Grotmas detachment. The detachments are going to be based on 3 separate categories. How much the detachment flavor fits the army, where an S means that that flavor is perfect for the faction, and an F means the flavor is completely wrong and doesn't feel like it belongs in that detachment. Think something like World Eater Shooting Detachment or Tau Fire Warrior Melee Detachment. How much the detachment changes up list building for the detachment. An S means that multiple units are seeing little to no play right now, are being promoted, or get major boosts from the detachment. And an F means you just drag and drop a list that you're already building into the new detachment and make no changes. And finally, how strong is the detachment? An S means that I think it will be meta dominant and is going to see regular play with multiple tournament wins before the next data slate in the competitive leagues. And an F means I think it will see zero play whatsoever. It's not really even going to be worth bothering with. I think that a truly good detachment is going to need to hit all 3 of these things pretty well, so let's jump into it. The Adeptus Custodes Solar Spearhead Detachment gets an A in Flavor, a C in Diversity, and an F in Strength for an overall ranking of C. Now, please note, I am not considering any Forge World models in this review, because I don't advise people buying Forge World. Yes, I know that this detachment is basically made for Forge World, and this detachment's actual strength is probably closer to A tier, but that is if you have the Forge World Dreadnoughts. The plastic dreadnought is just not good enough to get support from here, and Custodes bikers did get better, but not enough to make this worth playing just for bikers and 2 bad dreadnoughts. The dreadnoughts being characters is great flavor though, love that. The Sisters of Battle Champions of Faith detachment is getting an A in Flavor, a B in Diversity, and a C in Strength for an overall ranking of B. I like Sacrosanct and Paragon Warsuits seeing play together. I think that it creates a very interesting dynamic. A lot of the stratagems feel pretty good and feel like they make sense for this style of army. And sacrificing Miracle Dice for buffs is extremely in line with what Sisters of Battle are. If this didn't come out alongside Sisters losing anywhere between 33 to 66% of the Miracle Dice that they generate in a game, I would think the strength of this detachment was much higher than I currently do. It's hard for me to see this doing particularly well, but I think any Sisters of Battle army is a good enough army to see some success. The Adeptus Mechanicus Hallowscreed Battleclade gets an S in Flavor, an S in Diversity, and an S in Strength for an overall ranking of S. I think this is easily the best in-show detachment for Grotmas. It's not my favorite, but it is my choice for the best overall. AdMech tinkering with units to put them into overdrive is super flavorful. The rules are diverse enough that units that were unplayable before are now potentially must-run units. And it has a great combination of power, reliability, and flexibility to make it a powerhouse of a competitive detachment. Best of all, this detachment single-handedly bumps AdMech into a reasonable tier spot on my affordability tier list. The Agents of the Imperium Veiled Blade Elimination Force gets a C in Flavor, a D in Diversity, and an F in Strength for an overall ranking of D. I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to see Imperial Agents as a real army, and this detachment is not helping. If instead of the detachment rule being you can cast your special ability twice, it was something like your Officio Assassinorum units lose the Epic Hero keyword, and then you didn't have to take the enhancements but could instead choose to, I could see this detachment at least being silly, stupid fun where you're running around with 12 assassins, but as is, it's just boring. The Astra Militarum Bridgehead Strike is going to get an S in Flavor, an A in Diversity, and a B in Strength for an overall ranking of A. It is a very different list from what we've been seeing from guards so far. Time to dust off those 300 guardsmen from 9th edition and get ready to annoy your opponent to no end with bodies, bodies, bodies. Is the killing power of this army impressive? Not particularly. Is it going to make it to top tables by completely move blocking your opponent out of the midboard? Absolutely. This thing gets an automatic S in Flavor just for having a stratagem that kills your own guardsmen in the detachment that floods the board with guardsmen. The Imperial Knights Questor Forge Pact gets an A in Flavor, a C in Diversity, and a C in Strength for an overall ranking of C. AdMech and Imperial Knights fit together very well, but I think it would have fit even better if this was an AdMech army adding Knights to their roster. I don't think much changes for list building for this, as an Imperial Knights faction could already run Imperial agents, and I don't think Knights players are going to want to run a bunch of Skitarii when they could get the same job done with only a handful of Imperial agents. It's not completely worthless, but it's just not as exciting. Chaos Knights Iconoclast Fiefdom Detachment gets an A in Flavor, an A in Diversity, and an A in Strength for an overall ranking of A. This is the cooler version of Imperial Knights. Mulching Chaos Cultists for a buff feels much more chaos than standing next to Skitarii feels for the Imperium. This also actually does stuff to enable big Chaos Knights to feel like they could have a point. Will big Chaos Knights see play? I have no clue. But at least there feels like a reason to do so when you can get a Despoiler firing off 6 different guns with sustained hits or lethal hits. Makes it at least worth considering. Chaos Demons Khorne Detachment Blood Legion is getting an S in Flavor, a D in Diversity, an A in Strength for an overall ranking of A. Khorne won big on this detachment. It gives them everything they could possibly want. Sticky objectives to bait enemies in, surge moves to get into combat, enhancements and stratagems to make smashing face and getting into range to smash face better. There's no notes there. I would be surprised to not see this detachment getting to top tables at tournaments. I want to rate this higher than I am, but Oops All Khorne was already a completely viable detachment, so you can take that, drop it here, and find success without making too many changes. Chaos Demons Nurgle Legion, the Plague Legion, is going to be getting a D for Flavor, a B for Diversity, and an F for Strength, with an overall ranking of D. When you think of Nurgle, what is the first thing you think of? If you said Battle Shock, then congratulations, you're lying. The only thing that saves this detachment from being an F tier for Flavor is that Battle Shock is at least a debuff, which does kind of fit with what Nurgle likes to do. But it feels like saying that the natural predator of the moose is the killer whale. It might be true, but it's not going to be where your mind goes to when you think of hunting moose. The diversity gets a higher grade for one reason and one reason only. Nurgle units were barely seeing play before in Chaos Demons, so by nature of running this detachment, you will see units that never saw play before. Unfortunately, you will never see this detachment played unless your opponent is allergic to water. Slaanesh's Legion of Excess, though, is going to be getting an A for Flavor, an S for Diversity, and an S for Strength for an overall ranking of S. Slaanesh wasn't good before. I think it's going to be great now. I think this detachment's power might be top 3 out of what we saw in Grotmas, with Seductive Gambit being a very fun mechanic that the Slaanesh player can really abuse if they know their matchups and know the damage outputs of what their opponent is going to throw at them. It makes it so that this detachment is going to hit fast, it's going to hit hard, and it's going to die horribly when you make a wrong call, which is exactly what I want from Slaanesh Demons. Tzeentch Demons and the Scintillating Legion are going to be getting an S+ for Flavor, an S for Diversity, and an A for Strength, with an overall ranking of S. I'm pretty sure that this is my favorite detachment that came out of Grotmas. Everything about it is awesome and Tzeentch. Its rule is overly complicated bullshit that does stupid, overly complicated things. The enhancements are all great and play very nicely with Tzeentch's trickiness, and the stratagems are chef's kiss. This gets an S+ flavor because I cannot think of a single detachment that fits their army as well as this one does. Death Guard's Flyblown Host Detachment is going to be getting a B in Flavor, a B in Diversity, and a B in Strength, with an overall ranking of B. Scout is doing a lot of work to carry this detachment given how slow Death Guard is. I think it makes Blightlord Terminators much better when combined with the falling Rhino stocks that's going to result in some pretty different looking lists. Stealth is going to give better durability to Death Guard, and the idea of it being from swarms of flies is fitting, but I think it would have gotten more flavor points from me if it required Typhus to be in the army. The Thousand Suns Hexwarp Thrallband is going to be getting an A in Flavor, an F in Diversity, and an F in Strength for an overall ranking of D. I don't know why you would even run this detachment when the Index Thousand Suns detachment exists. This is just a straight downgrade in every single way. It only affects your psychic weapons, but it doesn't give you any ways of making other weapons in your army psychic. It gives you +1 to wound on your psychic weapons, which Magnus already does. It lets you reroll wound rolls of 1 for your psychic weapons, which is something you already do if you're running Rubric Marines. Thousand Suns don't have the list diversity for this to do anything interesting other than dropping Magnus, which is stupid since he is the best part of the army. The only saving grace for this army is that the Tzeentch-based faction getting reality manipulating effects when they take over more of the board makes sense as them spreading the impact of the warp. World Eaters with their Vessels of Wrath is going to be getting a B in flavor, a D in diversity, and a B in strength for an overall ranking of B. This detachment is simply consistent, which I love. You can guarantee advance and charge for your most important units every single turn, and if you already have that, guarantee them whatever else is needed. This detachment loses some power on the charge in terms of less attacks and less strength, which can be critical for some breakpoints, but its enhancements and stratagems do enough to make up for those. I think it's about as strong as the current detachment, but World Eater's limited lineup means this is probably just your current World Eaters detachment minus Angron, but even then maybe not. For Chaos Space Marines Creations of Bile, I'm giving them an A for their flavor, a C for their diversity, and an S for their strength for an overall ranking of A. It's hard not to call this an S tier strength detachment when it's already won a GT. I think the flavor of a mad scientist having random effects on his experiments fits very nicely, but it does feel just a little bit strange for CSM specifically. Not enough to make it not fit, but enough to not make it S tier flavor. As far as list building, I think you can get pretty different with it, but I think you could still mostly drag and drop about 85% of a Veterans of the Long War detachment into here and be decently happy with the results. The Space Marines Librarius Conclave is going to be getting an A in flavor, an A in diversity, an A in strength for an overall ranking of A. Librarians are not seeing play right now, so this by nature is going to bring in completely new list building for the detachment. On top of that, all the balanced data slate changes are going to change up what is worth bringing and bring new units to the fold. I'm not sure that this would be that different of a build around detachment to the previous Space Marines Gladius detachment, but with the new data slate in mind, I think there are tons of openings for new units, especially with Stern Guard and Infernus Marines. The Black Templars Wrathful Procession is going to be getting a B in flavor, a C in diversity, and a D in strength for an overall rating of C. It feels fine to me in terms of flavor, but I don't think it does quite enough to push a new style of list building. I think it's strong enough to be fine for your casual games, but I don't see what it has that makes me want to take this over Righteous Crusaders if I want to win a game. Voice of Devotion could have absolutely just given the unit both of the litanies instead of replacing the chosen one, and that would have helped the strength out at least a little bit. Blood Angels Angelic Inheritors is going to be getting an A for flavor, a B for diversity, and an A for strength, with an overall rating of A. I love Hero Hammer. Hero Hammer is love, Hero Hammer is life, and Hero Hammer also tends to be more financially viable for new players. This detachment gives you the choice between utility, damage, and mobility in the detachment rule. I think a lot of the good data sheets will continue to be the good data sheets, but now you'll be able to jam 6 to 8 characters into the army and start making some cuts in other places. The Dark Angels Lion's Blade Task Force is going to be getting an A for flavor, an A for diversity, and a B for strength with an overall rating of A. Now, I will admit, I don't follow a lot of Dark Angels lore, but to my understanding, the individual wings of the Dark Angels tend to work more independent of each other as opposed to together. I personally love the flavor of fast spikes setting up slower Terminators to get into combat, so I did give it a bit higher flavor than it probably deserves, but screw it, it's my tier list. This detachment is probably not better than Gladius, but I think it'll show up every now and then at top tables. The Death Watch get to straight up be an army again, and so they are getting an A for flavor, an S plus for diversity, and a B for strength with an overall rating of A. I'm not sure how I could give an S plus tier diversity to anyone else when Deathwatch is the only one that's actually a new army that just straight up did not exist before Grotmas. The different types of rounds and stratagems all feel very Deathwatch and have been better balanced for competitive play to not break the game. The overall rules in the detachment are all very similar to what we had, but the new data sheets feel much better to me than the old ones did. I won't be surprised to see Deathwatch do well, but I would be surprised to see them completely take over the meta. The Grey Knights Warpbane Task Force is going to be getting a D in flavor, a C in diversity, and an S in strength for an overall rating of B. I think this Grey Knights got a very strong detachment. Being able to change out mobility for damage is a great choice for players to better fit their Grey Knights to their playstyle. The problem for me here is that the detachment rule of control big chunks of the board, get a buff, makes more sense for other factions to me more than it does for Grey Knights. Additionally, I think this detachment does not do a whole lot to change up the way Grey Knights build their lists, other than just jamming in a bunch of purifiers. Grey Knights don't have a lot of options in terms of what they can bring, which is certainly not helping, but the detachment doesn't really feel like it incentivizes you to go too far off. The Space Wolves got Champions of Fenris, which is going to earn them a C in flavor, an A in diversity, and a C in strength for an overall rating of C. The Space Wolves rules just feel very uninspired to me. On the surface, it immediately looks to me like they started creating the rules and then panicked, remembering that the big unit for Space Wolves right now is Wolf Riders. And then GW decided they needed to put an unnecessary limiter to box out what people were already running. This does make the list building process feel very different for sure, because Space Wolves can't efficiently run their best unit in it, but I just don't see why this is the Space Wolves detachment. A 3-inch reactive charge is certainly something to help you get into combat, but this would feel a lot cooler to me in World Eaters, where Blood Surge can get them within 3 inches to then let you charge your opponent from potentially 9 inches on their turn. I could see this detachment seeing some small experimental play because of how good Wolves Wisdom and Fang Rune Pendant are, but I just don't see why you would run this detachment over any other half-decent option Space Wolves have. Also, can we talk about how weird it is to have a place a unit not in engagement range into strategic reserves stratagem and a detachment where your rule is go into engagement range? Eldari got Armored War Host for Grotmas, and I'm going to be giving its flavor a C, its diversity a B, and its strength a D for an overall rating of C. I guess that Eldar vehicles are particularly fast for the detachment rule, but it feels weird that it doesn't include Eldar bikes. I'm sure this will look better with the Eldar Codex changing datasheets, but I just don't see why it's worth playing right now and how it's not just Star Shatter at home. The Drukhari got Reaper's Wager, which is going to get a D in flavor, a B in diversity, and a C in strength for an overall rating of C. Now maybe it's just because I don't know Drukhari lore that well, but this just doesn't feel like it makes sense to me for a detachment rule. It's funny, don't get me wrong, but I just kind of don't care. This feels like a lot to juggle on top of pain tokens, and as someone who plays Tau, I can tell you that mechanics that require multiple different units at once to get a job done create some very awkward scenarios, where if one thing goes a little bit wrong, you suddenly have to completely change your plan and it just derails entirely. I guess if you have a lot of Quins and Drukhari already, you can play this for some funsies. But if you want to win, I don't see why you would pick this and deal with the headache when you could just play Sky Splinter Assault. The Genestealers got the Final Day detachment, which is going to be getting an S for flavor, an S for diversity, and a B for strength, with an overall rating of S. I hope that Genesteel players are happy with this. Finally getting to mix Tyranids on the table and having both sides of the army get a meaningful buff is going to feel great. The Tyranids being limited to Vanguard invaders on one hand does seem limiting for list building, but it is a huge flavor win for how Genestealers actually operate. The only thing I think holding this detachment back is just how difficult it may be to deliver the Tyranid Catalyst aura onto the premium targets that the Genestealers want to hit. Tyranids, on the other hand, got Warrior Bioform Onslaught, which is going to be getting an A for flavor, a B for diversity, and a B for strength for an overall rating of B. I am glad that Tyranid Warriors are finally playable for the first time of the edition. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see this detachment have some good X and 1 showings at GTs and maybe be a bit of an RTT stomper because it is a lot of wounds and invulns to chew through. But I don't think it's going to topple the better Tyranid detachments, which are currently around a high B to low A tier army in my opinion. The Leagues of Votann got the Hearthbound detachment, which is going to get an F in flavor, a D in diversity, and a D in strength, for an overall rating of D. I just don't get this detachment or what it's trying to do. To me, judgment tokens are the Votann mechanic, and it has no meaningful way to interact with them. You could literally take this entire detachment, drop it in any other army that has some level of both melee and shooting, and it would be perfectly in line for that army. Whoever made this feels like they pulled a random army out of a hat, accidentally read it as Space Marine Detachment, and then had to last minute adjust it to have Votann units instead. Votann don't have the range to make this feel like it gets built that much different from a list building perspective, and I just don't see why you run this over the Index detachment. The Necrons got the Star Shatter Arsenal, which gets a B in flavor, a D in diversity, and an S plus in strength for an overall rating of B. Now mark my words, this is going to be the best detachment to come out of Grotmas competitively speaking. Necrons are already one of the best armies in the game, and this detachment just takes the currently best Necrons list and makes it better. I think that if you built this list the way it looks like you are supposed to, with lots of vehicles and tons of mounted units, then it would probably be a B level diversity detachment. But instead, I think this detachment is going to be best if you just run what you are already running so you can have some units to contest the midboard and buy space for your wildly overpowered Doomsday Arcs. The Orks got the Tactical Brigade Detachment, which gets an S for flavor, a B for diversity, and an S for strength with an overall rating of S. I am not sure it is possible to write an Orks detachment that isn't an automatic flavor win. Bosses telling the stupid gits what to do, and being able to tell them to do even more stuff at the risk of taking random damage is just everything an Ork player wants. The stratagems are short and sweet, they're not very complicated, but they are very impactful. This might be the default Ork detachment now, and I expect it to take over big chunks of the metagame. It's fun, it's strong, Orks have tons of war bosses, what else is there? And finally, the Tau Empire got the Auxiliary Cadre. In terms of flavor, it's an S, in terms of diversity, it's an S, and in terms of strength, it's a B, for an overall rating of S. The Tau detachment seems great to me on paper. The detachment rule enables very fun list building that makes use of everything in your codex and makes it feel better. It makes a lot of new units viable that Tau weren't running, like Kroot Hounds, Kroot Rampagers, Ghost Keels, Shapers, and the stratagems feel very, very good. The one downside for me is that the stratagems feel like they are the strongest part of this detachment, and Tau have very bad CP generation and CP cheating. The jank that you can pull off with things like 30-inch moving Vespids is hilarious, but it also is going to cost you a ton of CP. I think this is a style of list that will be very good with very good players, but it has so many moving parts and mini games to play with positioning that it's going to be a lot worse for the average player. And that's everything. Here is the final ranking for all of the Grotmas detachments. I think Grotmas was overall a huge success. I've ordered the tiers from top of the rank to bottom of the rank based entirely off of how I feel about the detachment. Remember, this is looking at detachments from an army flavor standpoint, an army diversity standpoint, and army power. If you want an idea of where the rankings would go based off of any particular category that matters the most to you, just go double check what I gave them on the individual rankings.